Hello, guys. Welcome back to another episode here on European Confessions. There is a message that I want to share with you guys, and this message it comes from a translation of a voice note that I received. So a lot of people have been asking, why is it a lot of people that are confessing are from Zim? I think that in this generation, a lot of exposing is going on in Zim, and a lot of people that went out to get their tokologies, they are now confessing because they have seen the damage that these things can cause. Because back in the day, a lot of people would just go and get a tokology so that it can look after the homestead. So that thing, it will then start to demand either blood or just to be given a wife amongst the women that will be born into that family. So people are tired of that stuff. So usually before someone dies, they confess. That is why most of the confession they do come from Zim, because people are tired of living in that situation whereby you know that your grandmother or your grandfather had some ritualistic items. People are trying to move away from that type of a lifestyle. There is a message that I want to share with you guys, and it is a translation of a message that I received that was sent to me by our dear brother who is there in South Africa. The message reads like this: Hello, my brother, how are you? Can you please post my story? I am a man currently residing in South Africa. I am 35 years old, and I think that maybe I was just born to become a gardener. I don't think that there is something wrong by me being a gardener, but I am someone who has bad luck. Usually, the people that I work for, when I start working for those people, everyone that will be around, like the other gardeners, they'll start to tell me that these people that you are now working for, they are people who have good hearts. Like each and every year, they can give their workers property when they'll be buying new property. But whenever I start to work for someone, it is like I just make the situation to be bad for everyone that will be working there. Sometimes people would even be refused to be given bonuses, and those people that I would have found working, they will tell you that each and every year their boss would be giving them bonuses, but as long as I start working for their boss, then the boss will just say that he does not need to give anyone bonus, because giving someone a bonus, it is just a favor. So I know that I am the one who has bad luck, and I can trace that this bad luck, it comes from my grandmother, because my grandmother, she was a witch. She was a well-known witch from the area from where I come from. My brother, I come from an area which is in Zaka. Usually we say Zaka Rinopisa, meaning that Zaka is a place that is very hot, and when they say that it is very hot, they mean that the witches are there. They make that area to be very hot. That is where I come from. So I grew up with my grandmother. My grandmother had eight kids, including my father. And amongst those eight kids that my grandmother had, none of them ever left the village. This was a curse that was said that she had placed upon our fathers. Our grandmother was saying that if her kids were going to go and find a job in the city, then they were going to forget about her. So she wanted her kids to be by her side all the times. So we just grew up living in a single homestead with our grandmother and our father, as well as his brothers and their sisters. When my grandmother was married to my grandfather, she was accused of bewitching her father-in-law, who was our great grandfather. She refused that she had bewitched her father-in-law, but she was then taken to the village headman. And when she was taken to that village headman, she was asked to confess, but she refused. And she said that she was not a witch, even though some people in the village, they were saying that they knew that our grandmother was a witch because of some of the things that they had been doing in their homestead. Back in those days, a lot of people, they would go and get some charms so as to trap witches. So several times some people were claiming that they had managed to trap my grandmother, but some witches would come and rescue her before the sun set. The village headman then hired the services of a priest, and my grandmother after the priest had started praying for my grandmother, she started to manifest, and all the demons that were possessing her body, the demons of witchcraft, they started to speak. She told everyone that when she got married to our grandfather, she was told by the local village witches that for her to be properly accepted into that area, a sacrifice was needed. Our grandmother said that when she started staying with our grandfather, some of the witches from her village, like her own grandmother, they used to come into that village where she was now staying with our grandfather so that they can take her and go with her to their coven. So the witches in that area, because they hated the witches from the village from where our grandmother came from, so there was a disagreement. They didn't allow her to be taken out of the village in the middle of the night so that she can go and meet up with the members of her coven in which she grew up in. So when they were having that discussion, then they had an agreement, and for her to be accepted in the community by the local witches, a sacrifice was needed. My grandmother, as she was manifesting, she showed the priest and all the people that were present at that time and her in-laws how she had bewitched her father-in-law. So when our country was still called Rhodesia before independence, there was this 1 pound coin. They used to call it pondo. So my grandmother, as she was manifesting, she said that in that same village there was one man who was an enemy of our great grandfather. She then approached our grandmother and she proposed that deal to her, that he was willing to give her that 1 pound coin so that she can help him to make sure that our great grandfather was going to have some misfortunes that he was going to face in their homestead. Since my grandmother had been told that for her to be accepted into the community by the local witches, she had to sacrifice her own father-in-law. This was a great deal for her, and at the same time she was going to be given this money. And in those years, for you to have something like 1 pound, it was something that was unheard of when you were in the village. So she was really happy about that deal. My great grandfather was struck down by lightning. My grandmother was given these eggs, but these eggs, they are ritualistic eggs. They took these eggs from a chicken which had recently laid those eggs, and they were taken to a traditional healer, and a ceremony was performed on those eggs so that they can be transformed, and they now were belonging to a certain bird that is a lightning bird. This lightning bird looks like a cock. She then placed those eggs, she planted them in the fields just before the raining season had begun. Then one day, when my great grandfather was busy working in the fields, clouds then quickly gathered, and when he was busy herding the cattle which he had been using when he was busy cultivating the fields, that was when he was caught up in a thunderstorm, and he was still far from home, and he was struck by lightning. With that confession, my grandmother was chased out of the village, but she then used some charms. When my grandfather had said that he didn't love my grandmother anymore, she used some charms so as to make our grandfather follow her. My grandmother was staying at this other Roman Catholic church, but after she was caught using some charms, she was kicked out of that church. That was when she came in this area where I am saying it is called Zaka, where we grew up in. And once she was in that area, she rejoined with some of the powerful witches from that village. And our grandmother, I can say that she finished all of her children. The first amongst all of her children to die was one of our auntie. She then sacrificed her, and we grew up being told that people used to see our auntie's ghost as she was sitting right next to her grave. And each and every time that the villagers would see her, there will be a large bowl of meat that will be placed next to her. So people were saying that when my grandmother and some of the local witches had sacrificed my grandmother's daughter, who was our auntie, they could not eat that meat because there was something that was done by our father, because there was something that was done by our grandfather, since he was suspecting that his wife, since he knew that his wife was a witch, so they could not eat that meat because it was very bitter to their taste and they didn't like it. So they just dumped the meat by her grave, but people could not see it. Those that had their spiritual eyes opened, they were the ones that could see the ghost of our auntie as she was sitting right next to her grave crying, and beside her there was a huge bowl full of human meat. So we grew up not knowing most of my father's relatives, and right now if I go back to my grandmother's homestead, I am even afraid to sleep there because there are graves everywhere. When our grandmother was still alive, the problems that we started facing as her grandchildren was that the first pregnancy, let's say if you are a woman who is her grandchild, the first pregnancy that you are going to carry, that pregnancy will never be successful. All of her grandchildren, they faced the same issue, including me, because this issue even affected us as boys as well. Like if you have a girlfriend, and when your girlfriend falls pregnant, you will face that same issue whereby the first child that she will carry for you, she will just have a miscarriage. And all of these things, they happened when our grandmother was still alive. All of my grandmother's children, including my grandfather, they are all buried in a single place. That homestead, it is really scary. Right now, some of my sisters, but they are my cousin sisters, they are still staying there at our grandmother's homestead, but I am scared of going there. I just go there so that I can just pay respect to my father because he is also buried there, but I don't like that place at all. Each and every time when I there, I find myself blaming my grandmother because she is the reason and she is the source of all the problems that we are facing in this life. It is not an easy lifestyle for you to have bad luck each and every time, because we were told that which because the thing that happens is that since our grandmother was a witch, and being a witch, it brings a sort of like bad luck. People do not like to associate themselves with you. And the prayer that we have, we just pray that at the time of her death, she managed to throw away all of her witchcraft stuff, because my grandmother, she was a very powerful witch, and I do not want to be associated to any of her witchcraft if she didn't throw her witchcraft away at the time of her death. Back in Zaka, where we grew up in, we just hear stories whereby the local witches, if one of the witch is about to die, what they do is that they then make a deal whereby those that are still living, they take those tokoloshis, the hyenas, and some of the birds of the night that they use in their witchcraft business. So I hope that this is what happened to my grandmother. I hope that at the time of her death, her friends came and they collected all of her tokoloshis, because as a family, we do not want to be associated to her witchcraft. Dear listeners, right there was a narration of a voice note that I received.